join us. And yeah, if you can give your permissions, that would be awesome. There's Christen. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning and afternoon, and I know evening for some of you. Thanks for joining us today. Hi, Hasifa. Good to see you.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us. Hi,
Hello,
Joseph.
everyone.
Wema, hi.
Hi.
Good to see you all. Hi, Rita. Thanks for joining us. Good morning. Thanks for joining. Hi, Christen. Thanks for joining. Faustin, good to see you as well. Hi.
Bonsoir, bonsoir.
Bonsoir, Faustin. Thanks for joining us.
Oui, bonsoir. Merci beaucoup.
Awesome. Well, Christen, thank you so much for joining us. We'll give folks a couple more minutes, and in just about a minute, we'll get started. But while we wait for folks to join in, for everyone else that's joining us, why don't we go ahead with a short introduction on the chat? So if you can just type in, where you're calling in from. And I know we do the 6-word memoir activity in the class. So if you can write 6 words about your venture, I think it might give Christen a little bit of a context of where we're all calling in from. So where you're calling in your organization, just a 6-word on what you do. Let's take a minute while folks join in, and then we'll get started.
Nonya network.
Okay, we'll give it 15 more seconds, and then we'll try to press enter at once so that give some context.
Oh, sorry. I jumped the gun. Jumped the back gun.
All
Okay,
good.
sorry.
Okay, 5 seconds. So where you're calling from and about your venture. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You could press enter now. Okay, so we've got, Gail's in Denver, igniting big ideas through little steps. Buema Matata pillars of the Umken Hub entrepreneurship, giving required skills to girl, child, adults, helping refugees to live a sustainable world. Calling in from Uganda. Thanks for joining us, Buema. Jehu with Eden from Boston, Massachusetts, helping families permanently escape homelessness. Thanks for joining us. Awesome. If anyone else, oh, I'm seeing more. Angela from Uganda, working with farmers. Hasifa in Uganda, providing safe drugs. And Rita calling in from Western Colorado, gleaning surplus food for hunger relief. Thank you so much for joining us. Christen, I hope you get a little bit of a context on who else is here in this session with us.
Yeah, and I'm so honored to be here. And thanks for dealing with my setup. I'm calling from a new location, so it took me a minute to get connected, but I'm so excited to be here with all of you.
We're so honored to have you here, and we're so excited to have this conversation. We've got about an hour with Christen, and we'll try to make sure we have plenty of space for all of you to ask questions. Christen, for context, before the convening, we shared out the article, the piece that you recently penned with Tammy, with all of our participants. So they've had a chance to kind of read that piece. So we'll maybe talk a little bit about that as well. But maybe we'll get started. Gail and I will ask a few questions, and then we'll pass it on to everyone. The first question that we kind of wanted to start with is to ask you to kind of talk to us about She's the First and how you kind of started this organization many years ago at this point now.
Many years ago. Yeah. So we launched She's the First back in 2009. And the original goal of She's the First, and this might resonate with some of you, is actually much different than what it ended up becoming. So the original idea for She's the First was to launch a media campaign. We were both at the time journalists. We weren't working in social impact. I was actually still in university, and my co-founder Tammy was just out for about 1 year, maybe 2 years, and working in journalism. And so we launched She's the First because we saw that there was incredible work happening all across the world for girls' education, for girls' rights, but there wasn't a lot of ways that an individual person could take action and could support that work that was happening, or could really learn about how the issues that women and girls face are so interconnected and also very nuanced. So we launched She's the First as a way to connect all of those pieces. In some ways, it was crowdfunding, before we had GoFundMe, before we had these kind of crowdfunding sites. We were encouraging people to get together to talk about the issues women and girls face in their community, and then to fundraise for women and girls, and particularly girls' education at that time. So over the last 12 years or so, we really developed into a full NGO that not only does fundraising, but we also now provide flexible funding and grants to organizations that are working around the world with girls. And we really look at two main areas of impact. The first is strengthening the ecosystem for girls. And I noticed somebody's working in Uganda, specifically kind of with, what did you say? Let me just see. Required skills to girls and to adults. One of the things that we look at is how to work with organizations, especially grassroots organizations all around the world, to be as effective as possible in giving girls more power within the community. So how do we design programs? How do we know that they're working? How do we give girls more voice and more power within our programming all around the world, whether we're working in New Jersey or the organization's working in Nigeria? The second part that we work on is advocacy for girls' rights. And so that's working with girls as well as with youth-led and girl-led organizations to understand what are the issues that girls are most interested in, what are the issues that girls most want to talk about, and then bringing that to the forefront of our own media campaigns, which are global in nature.
Wow, so exciting. And it's really lovely to hear your story and to hear all of the incremental iterations, right? I'm assuming that behind those changes and that arc was a lot of reflection, a lot of maybe pulling in. We talk often about wanting to do it all and then just saying, well, we might have to just do one thing at a time. And then after that one step is taken, there's some learning of, oh, I guess we got to go a little right over here, just using that metaphor, or we need to take a backward step perhaps. So I just love that. And it does feel like your journey has been infused with a lot of attention to the community and to the needs and the voices of the community. And that's always in my heart personally. And I wanted to say that your article that you wrote with Tammy was just great, really easy to read, but also very full of thoughts and curiosities. And so congratulations on all of that. And one question that I had about, after reading the article is just to unpack a little bit about what's behind the theme or the title, right? Like taking risks without worrying about losing donors. And I'm always fascinated in my 20 plus years in the landscape, I suppose, of philanthropy, to try to narrow the power dynamics, narrow the gap, get some of the barriers out of there. And so your article is raising that kind of thematic consideration. But even behind that, what are the systems that have been in place that even made somebody think that it was risky to change, right? Like, where did all of that locking come in from your experience?
This is such a great and multi-layered question. So I guess one of the things that is really interesting about the way that She's the First kind of sits and functions in the world is that we do have this experience of both applying for grants and working with donors as an NGO and granting out to grassroots organizations. So we run our own programming, we work with girls, we create toolkits, but we're also the grantor to a portfolio of organizations. And being in that space has been so fascinating and such an incredible learning experience because we play both sides of those power dynamics. We know what it is to go to a funder and try to explain our programming and have them say, you know, all of that sounds great, but how do you fit that into what I'm trying to do? Right? Like, we know how difficult it is to kind of play that game, or you have the funder who's interested in the exact same things you are, kind of an umbrella level, and then they ask you for these metrics that are kind of out of left field, and now you have to figure out, how am I going to go and get these metrics that actually don't even have anything to do with really this supposed shared goal. But on the other hand, you know, we know what it is to want to understand what your impact looks like, right, across a vast community, and why funders are so interested in getting some of this data and being able to tell a story and those kinds of pieces. So I think that sitting in that space has allowed us to look really critically at how these systems function and in what ways they're broken. And one of the biggest ways that they're broken, of course, and I think all of us on this call know this very well, is that power sits with money across the board. And I would also feel pretty confident that all of us on this call would likely agree that that's not the way that it should be, and that we're in different ways working to really change that system of where power sits and why it sits where it does, both in various communities as well as in our global community. But I think for us, reaching that understanding and reaching it fairly early within our development as an organization gave us the ability to start asking questions about how we can push back just a little bit. And one of the biggest ways that we look to do that is with girls and girls' power, and thinking about how the systems that girls are sitting in today, how they do and how they do not provide pathways to power for girls. You know, and so one of the biggest ones, and I'm sure we can get into this a little bit, but almost across the board, girls especially, but youth generally, are really considered to be victims. And we often paint them that way, even when we're talking about empowerment programming. You know, there's a lot of the idea that you need to save them, but also that you need to create for them instead of with them, right? And I think that there are just a lot of different ways that we could be doing that better. But I do think, kind of to your end question, Gail, where do those systems come from? I really think that change is hard, because change means suggesting something different to the person who has all of the power, or seemingly has all of the power, which is often that person with the checkbook, whether it's the check to support a single girl in your program or a single student in your program, or it's the check that's going to fund an entire position, right? You're taking a risk by saying, what if we do this in a different way? What if we think about this in a different way? Because you don't know the answer anymore. We've had systems that have worked in that they have gotten money through the door for a long time. But I think we need to ask ourselves, what are the consequences of the ways that we portray stories? What are the consequences of the way that we are getting funding, or the way that we are partnering, or the ways that we are accepting how power exists within the infrastructure of social change? And are we okay with that? And how can we change that?
Yeah, it's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. And I think that power dynamics and how that centers around money is something that we've been thinking a lot about at Little Big Fund. And I know as groups, we talk a lot about that. There was an example that you gave in the piece about the sponsorship model, and that kind of being something that you took away quite a few years at this point now. And one of the first questions when Gail and I were talking about this was, where did the sponsorship model start, and why did it exist for so long? And then maybe a follow up to that is because you talked about losing some donors when you communicated the fact that you weren't going to do it anymore. How did you communicate that? And talk to us about the general reaction that you might have received from your donors that were used to kind of sponsoring a child or sponsoring a girl in your case.
Yeah, so the history of child sponsorship goes back a very, very long time, but it became much more popular, at least in the US, to US donors in the 1980s. And that was around the time that you start seeing a lot of these kind of commercials on TV. You start getting ads in magazines where you have a picture of a single child. They're clearly someone who's living in poverty, probably a distended belly. You know, there's very, very clear visual signals that this is somebody who is in active distress. And what organizations realized was that, of course, individual people react really strongly to an individual story. We know that's been true for all of human history, right? That's why we tell around the campfire stories about a single hero. We resonate really closely with the idea of one person because we can connect with one person. I can understand what it means for one person to be struggling, but I have a really hard time conceptually thinking about, you know, the 130 million girls around the world who are out of school. That problem seems much too complex. It seems too difficult. But as a donor, I can get one girl into school. That seems like something that's doable. And so because it's a model that worked and it appealed to people's sense of being the hero, of stepping in, of saving a life, all of these terms we've heard a lot kind of throughout the history of social change. Organizations not only stuck with it, but they created entire industries around it. So even today, there are organizations who have entire offices, staffing dedicated just to keeping sponsorship running because it works. You know, for us though, where that became really sticky, and we, you know, obviously get into some of these reasons in the article, but probably from the second year we were doing this, we started having conversations about the fact that this didn't quite feel the way we wanted it to feel, which is that if you are looking to change power dynamics in the world, if you're looking for a future where girls and where women have an equal amount of agency and the ability to really determine their own paths, then speaking about them, and certainly speaking down about them, you know, in the way that kind of sponsorships tend to make girls and children out to be victims, tend to make them out to be the person who needs saving, really kind of goes against actually the story that we're trying to tell, which is that girls and children at large have a ton of power, have a ton of agency, have the ability to create change if we allow for the correct conditions around them. And that was something that we internally talked about a lot, and we tried to fix in these small ways along the way. So, you know, first we tried to put an emphasis on selecting girls who were academically really bright so that it was something that was earned, it was a merit. But then we started, frankly, you know, giving so much in grants that wasn't really feasible for us to do anymore. So we started instead calling them scholarships, so that at least it felt like something that wasn't about saving someone, but was about providing an opportunity. But of course, the issue is that ultimately we still had a base of donors that were majority in the US, many of whom were white, and who were giving money and receiving in exchange the information of a young girl somewhere around the world, usually then a girl of color, right? And so the actual mechanics of that mimic some of the issues that girls and women are facing of being literally objectified, of being trafficked, of all of these sticky things that feel very much against what we're trying to work for. But I think more than anything else, it became about her. It's not with her. It's not a story that's being told by her. She doesn't get a lot of consent. She doesn't get a lot of voice in what's being shared about her. The expectation, and not just from she's the first, but just the cultural expectation is, if somebody is paying for you to go to school, you owe them everything, and you owe them all of the details of your life, and you kind of have to put yourself on display in this way that did not feel like it was about power to us, or rather it did feel like it was about power, but it wasn't about the girls' power. It was about the donors' power, and about the power of the organization too. And that wasn't the role that we wanted to have. And so I realized my answer is getting very long. Clearly I can talk about this for a very long time. But when we started communicating that out to donors, we actually started by just telling them about the changes and the positive changes. We didn't tell them we were cutting the sponsorship program until this year, until 3 years later. So we actually we worked the change communications so that the change happened before we started talking about why, because we wanted to make it as easy as possible for the donors that were with us to make that change. And we also wanted to get them into a new system and feeling good about that system before we started naming the thing. And what's been really interesting is that as a result of that, when we did come out and say, here's why we don't do sponsorships, it actually became our #1 social media post of all time. It was shared more than anything else we did. That article was shared more than any other article we've ever written. And our community really rallied around that. And they weren't taken back by it because we didn't make the announcement at the same time we made the change. The change itself was gradual.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
And I like long answers. I find it interesting to hear the word choices and the story, right, about that. And again, I really admire the thoughtfulness and the way that you really did intentionally try to, I want to say, share learning versus tell learning, right? Like we're going to share what we're learning and what we're experiencing organically, internally, and we're not going to tell you that this is how it is, which I think is very respectful for both, you know, in any form of communication. And I find myself very interested in semantics and in imagery and storytelling. You know, back in the 80s, I actually was really busy in a career in advertising. And I knew that advertising was all about persuasion, was all about making people want something or know something. It was very, very powerful. And today, I find myself very curious about how storytelling is being done to persuade, but also in a more authentic way, let's say. But still we have Facebook, still we have Instagram, still we have Twitter, still we have a need for an English language. We have words that we have to try to, redefine, just even the word scholarship has a very, European, scholarship means academics and going to university. You could have a scholarship of, farming that was only just based on your mastery and your experience of doing it, not necessarily being schooled in it. So anyways, a roundabout next question is just, what are your thoughts about some of the new ways that this group can start to gradually shift the languages, much like, say, pronouns are being used more often, but how do we shift that in a way that uplifts the communities that are other than us, right? Like they're working with people whose voices and stories they're hearing all the time. And how do we support changing the words, I guess, right? So that the message can be changed. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the best answer to this is to have those conversations with your constituents, have those conversations with your participants. When you use the word scholarship with them, when you use the word or the phrase global South with them, when you use the word feminism with them, what does that mean? And what are the connotations of that word? And do they agree with it? Right? Is that something that they want to use? And I think the best case scenario is actually pulling together, particularly for communications questions, a group of people who are representative of your stakeholders. Who are you communicating to? And who are you communicating about? And if you can get all of them in one room, thinking through and talking about the implications of some of the words that you use most often, I think you arrive at really interesting results. We talk about feminist mentorship a lot at She's the First, and that does not resonate with every community that we're working with. And so we have different versions of toolkits and handbooks and things, depending on where it's being used, that have been decided by those communities. So we have a rights-based mentorship approach if you are in Ethiopia, for example, but we've got a feminist-based approach if you're working in Kenya. And so it's the same thing, but we're talking about it differently because it's going to mean different things to different people. And I think that's true across the board. I think global South / developing world / that's something we're constantly wrestling with is when you're describing your participants, what are the words that you're using? Are you using words like vulnerable or marginalized, and how do they feel about that? And we're never going to have, to your point, Gail, we're never going to have that like vocabulary list of here's what's okay now.
Right.
It's constantly evolving. But I think we just have to be willing to have the conversation, right? Like, I don't really care if you call it a feminist mentorship manual. I care if you do it or not, right? Like, I care if the girls within your programming feel supported in their whole selves. And so whatever language we need to use in order to get us there, we can use that language.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's so interesting in Costa Rica. When we started Bean Voyage, our mission statement has, we're a feminist nonprofit in the first part of our but it was written in English and in the US, and obviously that's not something we get questioned about. And then in Costa Rica, when we were translating our mission statement, it had the word feminist, and our partner producer said, yeah, we're not machoists, we're also not feminists, we're equal for everyone. And the understanding of the definition of feminism from the academic perspective or all of the other perspective is so different from the perspective that producers have as it's to other people in everywhere in the world. And so that pushback can be quite helpful, I think, when you start opening up the conversation for sure. I really appreciate that answer. We're almost halfway through, and we want to make time for all of you to ask questions. Christen, I must say this is one of our most popular convenings. I see quite a lot of folks here, so I want to make time for as many folks to actually ask their own questions and introduce themselves as well. One last question. I know that, or at least from my side, one last question is, you've been talking about the Girl-Led Incubator program, and that's something that you've been running for a couple of years now. And I know that some of the countries, and I think we have someone from Nepal here. I know you're working in Nepal and you're working in a few other countries. Might it be possible to kind of talk to us a bit more about it? We've emailed the program that you'd sent to us, but I think this might be a good chance to also introduce it to other folks as well in our network and see if they can take away and maybe even share it with their communities.
Definitely. So the Girl-Led Incubator was born out of the fact that we had a few previous students, alumna, who graduated out of partner programs, out of She's the First programs, and who went on to start their own community projects. And these are all young women. They're in their early 20s, mid 20s. And as I'm sure everyone on this call knows, getting funding for your social impact project is not an easy thing, especially when you're not yet registered or you're in the process of registering. It can feel really impossible to get funding. There's also, I think, a lot of people who are social entrepreneurs who weren't trained in this work. I wasn't trained to be a nonprofit executive, right? I was a social entrepreneur who became a nonprofit executive when my social enterprise grew up, so to speak, which I know is the trajectory that everyone here is on. And that's not easy. And I know everyone on this call has had a lot of experience with learning as you go, with having a funder or a partner or someone mention a framework or a new term, and you're like frantically Googling on the side, what is a theory of change? And let me go ahead and just make that or create that. Which is why, organizations like Little Big Fund are so important, because it helps you pull some of those skills together, pull the network together. We all need these convenings. And that's what the Girl-Led Incubator does as well, is we pull together organizations that are led by women up to age 27 who are working on projects within their own community. Usually, almost always, they're not yet registered. And what we're looking to do is over the course of a 3-year intensive,
You gotta go walk.
we're looking to take them from that early stage project and pilot phase to a fully registered organization that has a finished letter of inquiry, that has finished mission, vision, documentation, a theory of change, and a strategic plan in place. So the goal is that throughout that time, they'll get funding from She's the First. They'll have practice with how to not just apply for the grant, but how to report on it, how to work with funders, that kind of thing. So that by the time they roll off, they're well equipped to then go out to kind of next stage funding with a slightly bigger budget, with a little bit more experience under their belt. And so we are looking right now at potentially adding 1 or 2 more programs from South Asia. So if you are in South Asia and working on a project specifically with girls, it does have to be, or you have friends who are, definitely reach out and let me know, because that's something we're looking for. And then pending funding, we're hoping to launch a second cohort next year. So you can follow along with She's the First, and hopefully we'll have another one going next year too.
For sure. And we'll send out, in my follow-up, I'll send out the link one more time. So if you want to share within your networks, participants for most of our programs come from other programs. So we have participants here from the Athari Group, the Kapadia Education Foundation, the Resolution Project. So within those networks, there might be some people that would be there. I'm starting to see questions, which I think might be a good place for us to stop speaking and then actually open up for all of you to really introduce yourselves and ask questions. Brianna, I see your question. If you want to come off mute, maybe this might be a good chance for you to introduce yourself too and what you're running, and then maybe you can ask your question.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Literally everything you've been saying has been resonating with me, and especially like the last part. My organization really resonates with that in between trying to get registered and get experience and all of that jazz. But I was wondering, is that opportunity like for those only who have participated in She's the First, or is that just to anyone and everyone?
No, that's an open program. So right now, like I said, we're looking for potential participants in South Asia, but we are, I guess, a couple of things. One, at large, if you're running programs with and for girls, we want to know you. We want to know about you, because there are a lot of other training opportunities, potential funding opportunities, just things like that we like to keep that community plugged into. And then number 2, the cohort next year will be open again, just broadly across the globe. So if you're working with girls, definitely feel free to send me a note.
Okay, thank you. I'll for sure send that. And would you drop like your contact information here?
Yeah, I think Avi, can you just include my email in the follow-up?
Yes, I'll send that out to everyone.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the question. Anyone else? We can do the hand raise function, but you can also just come off mute. We have some time, and we'd love for you to ask your questions and maybe tell us a bit more about what you're doing. Here's some background noise. I'm gonna mute there. Okay, Joseph, I see you're off mute. Do you want to ask a quick question?
Oh yeah, I guess I was gonna say quickly. We focus on education in Haiti with Hormuz Foundation. My name is Joseph. I live in DC, but we work in Haiti. We focus on education, of course, for young kids and also women's economic empowerment. But we also, I'm not a woman, so I've got women on the board to work with the people, young girls in school, because I think you were said earlier that not trying to see them as victims and just doing for them. So we try to, always, I like to say we do community-led programs. But quick question is, how, when you're dealing with young girls, for example, and you want them to, lead active part in things that involve them, what's maybe the best way to go about doing that? Because, you know, there's some cultural differences in Haiti. Maybe they're a lot more shy or a lot more reluctant. Maybe the environment doesn't give them that idea about taking the lead, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
So that's a clear question.
It's a great question. And I think there are a couple of elements that we found are really successful regardless of the context that you're in. And the first is having mentors that look like them, that are from their community, and that are fairly close in age to them. So if you're working with girls who are, you know, let's say 10 to 15 or so, you're looking for mentors who are probably 18 to 25. And you're probably going to max out at 30. Like 30 is probably the oldest you can go, and she's got to be a pretty cool 30-year-old. And a lot of that is because what you're looking for is the difference between a teacher and an authority figure and a mentor, who is somebody who is closer to a peer. So it's somebody that I can trust, kind of gets me and understands what I'm going through, but isn't so close in age that I feel like I have to impress them, right? And that's kind of the sweet spot that you want to look for when you're looking for who is actually working directly with those girls, who's bringing the programs to them, and who's asking them questions. Because the second part that we really strongly advocate for is getting girls involved in the programming itself and using that as a way to build up their leadership experience, their actual use of power, their agency, and the effectiveness of the program. Because it's the girls who are going to understand what their biggest challenges are. You know, there's this really great example Population Council uses a lot. They're a research organization, and I really love, especially if you're working with girls. They talk about your personal map of any given community, and that if you have kids draw where in the community they go on a regular basis, and you have boys do this over the course of their kind of adolescence, what you see is that their map gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And by the time they're 18, they can kind of do what they want, go where they want, right? They have kind of free reign. For girls, what you see is that it gets bigger, bigger, bigger up until around somewhere in between ages 10 to 12, and then it shrinks. And that's because there are areas of the community where girls who've reached adolescence are no longer safe. Maybe it's a spot where a lot of men are hanging out. Maybe there's boda drivers. A lot of times parents will restrict girls' movement because they're worried about them, that kind of thing. But the only way that you will ever know what a girl's map of the community is to have them do it for you, is to have them draw it, is to ask them, where do you go? Where do you walk? And so this is one of the reasons, for example, we see that many youth programs actually end up benefiting young men and not girls and boys equally, because oftentimes girls just have a harder time literally getting there or accessing, or the time of day is bad for chores that they're responsible for, all of these things. But all of that differs so much community to community. You know, I've worked with organizations all over the world, and I could never come in to the communities you're working with in Haiti and say, hey, here's how you should think about changing this. But the girls can do that for you. And they can do it more easily than even the community leaders that you have. Like, they're the ones who really know intimately. And so those would be the two biggest things I would recommend is, number one, make sure that the mentors, the people that you have working with girls, are within that kind of sweet spot age group. They can relate to the girls, they're from those communities. And number two, that girls themselves are actually part of the process of designing your program, even if it's in ways that you tweak it, or where you want to hold your program, or what time, or that kind of thing. They're also then going to see those changes, and they're going to know that they were responsible for it, and they're going to see that cause and effect. And next time, they're going to be even more likely to speak up. And eventually, you want them to get to the point where you don't have to ask the question. They're showing up in your office and they're saying, hey, we want a football program. Like, hey, we want to learn netball. We want, whatever the case might be. So those would be my two biggest recommendations.
Okay, great, thank you.
And I just would want to jump in and say, I love that approach. I agree with it. And then thinking through all of the activities that would create safety, let's say, or expression. So inviting young girls to come to a meeting is a wonderful idea, but they have to know that it's not going to create any more harm for them, that the exposure of walking to the meeting and getting the attention, right, that's there. I mean, I would think too in the communities that as someone reading a proposal, right, to have, a mentorship program, I would be also curious to see all of the other cultural, sensitive, but valuable and need money for steps, right? Like get a bus so they all are transported safely, perhaps, or they get to bring their mother with them if they want to, or all of those steps that the girls' voices could also help to figure out all the logistics, right? Not just the concept, but just you have to do it on a Saturday afternoon at 2 and you have to have Coca-Cola. Just, or something like that, right? So I would listen to all their ideas for the program implementation, as well as the conceptual themes. Wouldn't you agree, Christen?
Yeah, I would. And I think that's the easiest place to start. It's much easier to say to a girl, what time do you think that we should hold this? Or to a group of girls, what time should we hold this next program? Than it is to say to them, hey girls, what are the top 3 program goals you want to tackle this year? You want to kind of build your way up. We do, by the way, have a free resource that I can share with Abby to send out after on how to host those conversations with girls. So I can make sure that goes out in the email after, Abby, if you can follow up with me.
Yeah, I think I have the link, the wonderful resources that you've created. So I'll definitely include that as well.
Perfect.
I'm seeing a couple of other notes and just kind of want to also say, Rosemary, thanks for joining us. And I hope we all hope you're safe and are able to get home safe as well. And thanks for joining us somewhere despite the riots. Angela, I see your question and I'd love to kind of invite you to maybe quickly introduce yourself and ask your question. And I think we'll have time for maybe 2 more questions after this. So if anyone else has a question, just get ready and we'll call you up. Angela, you're up next.
Right. Oh, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. And my name is Angela. I'm all the way from Uganda. And I work with smallholder farmers. We help them to be more productive, but also we make sure that we can work against malnutrition among their households, especially in the rural areas. Now, Christen, you are doing a very amazing job, and I'm happy to hear that you're inspiring many young girls. I just wanted to hear about your experience about, starting an organization and having to go through all the stages up to where you are now. What is like your highlights in your experiences as you've had to, grow an organization from a young stage to where you are now? And also one interesting question that has been going through my mind has been, do you keep in touch with the girls and to track their success? And also if they become successful, do they come back, to inspire the rest of the girls that you're working with? It's just something that I would like to hear. Yeah,
great question.
Thank you.
So I'll start with your second question, just because it's a shorter one, which is, yes, we do track girls over time. But we try to balance that a bit, because we're looking for stories of individuals that we can show as examples of what happens when girls really do have power, when they're given power. And I think that storytelling is really important. Also because, as I mentioned earlier, some of these girls go on to start their own organizations working with girls, or they go on into positions where they're hiring and they're starting to change the status quo within their communities, within their countries, because they're gaining power and they're using it. And, we, like everyone else, we want to see that in real time. We want to know that that's happening. And we do want them to come back and to speak with girls about their own trajectory, because you need to be able to see girls like you finding success if you want to believe that you can do it yourself, right? And at this point now, so we've been working for the last 12 years. There's an alumna of one of our programs and one of our partner programs. She's gone through both. who's launching her own business in neuromonitoring in India. And she is flying to New York, where I'm normally based, in 2 weeks to pick up equipment for her business. And so for the first time ever, I'm going to get to see one of our alumna in New York because she flew herself out there as part of this huge business endeavor that she's taking on. So you just get to start to see these ripples in this way that is really incredible. So I know most of you are not yet at 10 years in, but it will happen, and it will be incredible when they show up in your office as the business leader that you always knew they were going to be. But for, I think, some of the biggest challenges of just growing over time, some of you might be experiencing this already, but when you've created an organization, you don't get to just be the head of programs or the executive director, right? You're also the head of HR, and you're also the head of communications, and you're also deciding what advocacy campaign is happening. And you have to create a legal contract with no legal background whatsoever. You have all of these other jobs that you have to do. And if you want the organization to succeed, you have to do them pretty well. And so I think that has been the hardest thing for me. And luckily I have a co-founder, so I can share that burden. But we found that, we've had to go to a lot of people. We've had to get very comfortable asking for help and asking for advice and asking for input, because I am never going to get a law degree, but I need these contracts to be pretty solid. I'm not a human resources professional, but I need to know how to hire someone effectively, the contracts that I need, the laws that are in place. I need to know how to let go of someone. All of these things that, I did not go into social change in order to fire someone, but as part of organizations, like eventually you might have to do that, right? Or promote someone. How do you promote someone and do that really well? How do you cultivate talent? All of these things that are so far outside of the impact that we're looking to create, but is so important to the work that we do every single day. And so other than, I guess we can have a whole other event session one day about those challenges, my advice would be to surround yourself with the people that you can go to for help on all of those things, because they're important and we have to do them. And ideally we can do them well, even if that's not, necessarily what you had intended your 9 to 5 every day to look like.
Yeah, firing and hiring definitely is one of the toughest things I've ever had to do, and wish I went to business school for that, for sure. But really appreciate that answer. I think we can do one more question. So I'll just kind of leave some space here, and if anyone who maybe hasn't asked a question yet wants to ask a question, just go off mute and ask a question.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, go for it, Moira.
Yeah, I see they are doing the amazing job with this Christine. But I just have a quick question. Are you also in your program? Are you expanding your project in a rural area, like in a refugee settlement, like focusing in emergency intervention? Because like in this period of COVID-19, especially in a rural area, early child marriage, like we have a lot of problems of SGBV cases, like especially in refugee camps. I don't know if you have that the program to enter in a humanitarian project.
Yeah, so we're not currently working in refugee settlements or in crisis areas. And a big part of that is because the partner portfolio that we work within, the grants that we do, are really long-term. So we do 6-year cohorts. Our last cohort was actually over the course of 10 years. And so what we're looking to do there is to really take some of the pressure off of grassroots organizations, to let them innovate, to let them try some of these tools and things that She's the First has, to see what works, to see what doesn't work, and to try new things with girls, so that we can then kind of use those ideas and push them out to other organizations. So we want to make sure that our partner organizations have the room to fail without them having to report back into She's the First and being like, sorry, this didn't work. Is my funding still safe? So as long as there are no ethical issues or ethical concerns, they have a 6-year cycle with us. A 6-year cycle is very hard to pull off in an emergency situation because it's constantly changing, it's constantly moving. But there are kind of 2 things that we have. The first is the toolkits that Avi is going to share out. Some of the resources that we have are designed. One of them is actually intended to be used in emergency situations. We developed it during COVID, which is how to work with girls and talk to girls about risks that they're facing when those risks are changing really quickly. How can your organization work to address them? And so this is something a lot of organizations use during COVID to understand, maybe I knew the risks that girls in my community were facing before COVID, but now everything is shifting. How can I quickly understand what it is that girls are facing now and in 2 months from now and in 2 months from then, so I can better address it and create programming for it. The other is that as we grow, we're very interested in providing more one-off grant opportunities so that, there are a lot of funders who won't give to grassroots organizations, but who are very interested in both local solutions and in funding local organizations, but they don't have the infrastructure for the grant reporting for an organization that doesn't have a whole M&E or a whole development department. So that's where She's the First is hoping to come in a bit more. And so one of the ideas there is that ideally we can get funding to be able to do grassroots organization funding for organizations who are working with girls in emergencies. Because what we see is, just like under kind of ordinary circumstances, it's always the grassroots organizations that are reaching some of the most vulnerable girls, especially in emergency situations, in refugee situations, all of this. And yet they're not the ones who get the funding, and they're not set up to be able to handle the funding in terms of the reporting and things that are required for some of these really big funders. So I guess the answer to that is we're trying, and we're not there yet.
For that response, and we're going to be cheering you on for that kind of expansion in the coming years as well. I saw a question. I think Bienvenue, you had a quick question, and then Gail will wrap us up with 2 questions. I know I said one question, but I think we'll have time. Go ahead, Bienvenue.
My name is Bienvenue Kamondo, and I'm from Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm a lawyer, and I'm running a non-profit for former child soldiers, and we are working with them to help them to reintegrate the community, because in eastern part of Democratic Republic of Congo, we are living in a war area where many situations is very, very disastrous because of civil war and the continual war. And that I want to know only, it's to know the criteria of selecting your fellows, and if you have such programs that can be similar to our works that we have been doing, and how we can participate to that to develop our community, because we are from low-income communities, about these kids who have been fighting in war situations and who want reintegration in the community. Thank you, Christen.
Thanks. So for She's the First, we really do focus in on programs that are working directly with girls and specifically with girls. So generally, we don't partner with organizations that do only co-ed programming, for example, because all of our expertise and all of our resources are really focused on how do you program for girls. With that said, some of the resources that Avi is going to be sharing out, again, they're designed with girls in mind, but they're actually taking some universal concepts like the focus group idea and trying to make it so that anyone, regardless of their background, whether they're a researcher or not, can implement some of those ideas. the same thing with the risk register that he'll share. It's designed for girls, but it will work for any community. And so I would suggest taking a look at some of those resources and seeing what might be helpful there, what might click there for you.
Okay, but we have we are working with both men's and girls, because those who have been former child soldiers, there are those who have been abusing sexually, who have been in slavery in the bush with militia. We have some survivors who are amongst our targets, and I mean, maybe those who can be beneficiary of the program if there are something that can fit well to their needs.
Yeah, so I would say when Abby shares out the resources, you can sign up there for, we have a Girls First Network, which is for any organization that has programs that work with girls. And that's where we share opportunities, both within She's the First, when we're hosting trainings or when we have an opening for partnerships or we're doing a new grant program, as well as outside opportunities as well. So when we see a funding opportunity in East Africa, for example, it gets shared there. So that's definitely the first step. And then from there, all of the requirements for various programs are kind of linked off to the various opportunities as we share them out.
Thank you, Christen.
Yeah, thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Christen, for the amazing resources you're offering us, ideas, the conversation. I'm really grateful for the kind of normalcy, I guess. We're just sitting here talking, having some questions. It's not necessarily a pitch. It's not necessarily a confessional. It's just a nice conversation. I appreciate that tone. So thank you for being a part of that and being so flexible and spontaneous. And the last question I have is, and we just have a couple of minutes, but so many of us here, well, not me as much, but everybody else is just working so hard every day, 24/7, right? On their mission, on their vision. And what are some suggestions that you have for just balancing, finding joy, staying resilient, reminding yourself of, this is why I'm doing this work, even though it's so hard and it feels almost like it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back every day. But in your experience, what are some little, suggestions that you have for staying connected to the heart as we do this work?
I really think that self-care is not something you do when you're in crisis. It's something you do to prevent yourself from going into crisis. So this is going to look different for every person. For me, what that looks like is I have really strong peer mentors that I can turn to who are doing not necessarily the same work, but similar work, and who understand why it is so important to me, why I work the way I do, why I feel the way I do about that work, and to help me find my way when I'm feeling stressed or frustrated or down about the difficulty of it. The other thing that I find really useful is having your North Star and being able to articulate it. So for me, my North Star is a world where girls and women are safe and able to thrive, where each one can determine her own future. And I think, your organization has a mission statement. Knowing your mission statement, knowing the vision of the world that you are working to create, and being able to really hold that is a really powerful way that I reconnect to why I am where I am and why I'm doing the work that I'm doing when it gets really hard.
Thank you for sharing that. That is something that we try to keep in the back of our heads a lot, but I also know that we're constantly overworking and estimating our energy levels sometimes. Even I find that for myself so often. I was reminded earlier that we only have 2 months left in the year, and I thought I had 7 more things that I wanted to achieve this year, right? So it's really important to say that. I know we're at the point. So I just want to really thank Christen for your time, your energy, your wisdom, and resources that you've shared with our with our participants, we'll call ourselves the believers. So really appreciate your time this morning and afternoon for all of us. And I'll be sure to share the resources out along with Christen's email. And then also the information on the incubator program, if you want to share that with your network, that I think would be awesome. And I hope you'll all take the opportunity to stay in touch with Christen and follow along with She's the First, because they're doing some incredible work that I think will resonate very much with many of you. Thank you once again, Christen, for your time, and thank you everyone for joining us. November will be a very unique month. We're not going to have a convening, but we're going to do office hours. That's our kind of yearly office hours to talk about your projects for next year. So we won't see you as a group next month, but we will see you in December for a little Christmas fun that Gail and I are planning for everyone. So we'll see you together in a couple months' time. And thank you once again for being a part of this community. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Christen, once again.
Thank you, Christen.
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye.